Okay, with all of that laid out, CinemaCon was fun, but we now have to turn the page. We're going to be traveling back in time. The year is 1966. The best picture winner of that year was the Fred Zinnemann film A Man for All Seasons.
Hmm.
It defeated Alfie, The Russians Are Coming, The Russians Are Coming, The Sand Pebbles, and Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. So like of those five, I want to say the film that has aged the best in terms of the zeitgeist anyway is Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. People
Yeah.
really love, they still talk about that film a lot. These other four, maybe not as much, including A Man
Yeah.
for All Seasons.
Yeah. Alfie, I know, did get a remake in the 2000s, if I'm not mistaken. And I think Jude Law starred in it. But that's perhaps the only, I guess, film that maybe has some type of temporary cultural sort of thing happening there. But yeah, most people would talk about Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, and rightfully so. That is the other film of these five that I have seen, and I do think it is a very good film.
Yeah, for sure. I am really curious how The Russians Are Coming would play through the prism of 2025
Just given
because
that title.
the politics right now are so very different than
They are. They are.
1966. So, would be really curious to maybe give that one a spin. But winning out of this group, of course, was A Man for All Seasons. As we noted up at the top of the show, this was a first time watch for both Brendan and I.
That's right.
So, with all of that laid out, Brendan, are you ready to get into this one?
Let's talk about how this film is basically a mirroring of 2025.
Yeah, indeed. All right. A Man for All Seasons. It is directed by Fred Zinnemann, as we noted a moment ago. It stars Paul Schofield, Wendy Hiller, Leo McKern, Orson Welles. Yeah.
He's got one
Robert
scene,
Shaw.
and it's a very, very
Two.
effective scene.
Two scenes.
Oh, that's
But
right, too.
mostly
Yeah.
one. You're right.
Oh, yeah. The second scene is kind of a strange scene. It's actually kind of a funny scene.
Yeah. Robert Shaw, Susanna York, John Hurt in his first prominent role as
That was so
Richard
interesting
Richer.
seeing him. Yeah.
Absolutely. Nigel Davenport as the Duke of Norfolk. And of course, a bunch of others that come and go throughout the film. If you're not familiar with A Man of All Seasons, it tells the story of Sir Thomas More, who stood up to King Henry VIII when the king rejected the Roman Catholic Church to obtain a divorce and remarry. Now, how does that play into 2025? Oh, you'll see. All right, Brendan, what did you think about A Man for All Seasons?
It plays into 2025 because the film I couldn't stop thinking about was Conclave.
Yeah. Okay.
Like, and maybe
Yeah.
just take away the election backdrop of that film and replace it with matchmaking, I guess.
Okay.
It does
Yeah.
have sort of a similar aura, at least with regard to not just the politics of it all, but also the church backdrop specifically, showcasing really how a man was starting to bring a bit more of a progressive minded sensibility to the Catholic Church. I think that's in a way kind of mirroring of Ray Fiennes in Conclave. There are some comparisons we can make between him in that movie and Thomas More here. So I think that makes the movie incredibly fascinating to me. It's not my favorite of these Best Picture winners that we've done in the 1960s thus far, but I think it might be the most interesting. I find its subject matter really predictive, as I'm sure we'll talk about. What I think is more interesting about the film is given when it came out and the overall filmmaking of it. I want to start here before we get more into the subject matter itself, because I feel like this movie, A Man for All Seasons, kind of feels like a transitional film. It feels like it's sort of bridging the gap between the historical epics of old that we got with even some of these Best Picture winners, like a Lawrence of Arabia, for instance, or even Tom Jones in some ways. So it still kind of carries that similar aura, but there's kind of a raw grittiness to it that seems to allude to the American New Wave or the new Hollywood that wouldn't really take off until 1 year later, 1967. I can kind
Mhm.
of see this film bridging that gap a little bit. Like I see the historical auras of these old movies, but then I see the grittiness of something like a Bonnie and Clyde, for instance, even though it doesn't take place in a contemporary time span. Like I think that's what makes the movie really, really intriguing just as a piece of filmmaking. But I'm sure we'll talk about some of its predictive politics, some of its predictive religious hypocrisies at play as well. There is a timeliness to this movie that I really did appreciate. Not my favorite of these movies we talked about in this specific 1960s series, but a very fascinating one nonetheless.
Yeah, I liked this way more than I thought I would. Way more than I thought it would. However, to Brendan's point, it plays really, really well in 2025 in a similar way to what we talked about last week with The Sound of Music. I don't know if this won Best Picture in 1966 for the same reasons, but this film is essentially about a man who was so committed to anti-corruption and standing up to a tyrant's manipulative schemes that he was killed for it.
Yeah.
It's about sticking to your convictions and doing the right thing no matter the cost. And again, as simple as that sounds, through a 2025 lens, it almost has a Mrs. Miniver schmaltzy, we got to go to war kind of message.
Sure. Yeah.
I was weirdly very moved by that here. But even outside of the 2025 prism, because just like we talked about last week with The Sound of Music, there will always be a tyrant to fight against. There will always be a reason to show conviction. So there is a timelessness to the film's themes, and I think that is quite effective in execution, especially when you couple it to the religious angles of the film that Brennan was talking about in his opening thoughts. The other reason I really like this film is because of its immersiveness. And I don't mean conventionally in the sense that it has great production design and period accurate costuming and world building, all things that are really great here. They are. But what's so fascinating about this film is the level of detail regarding daily life in the 1500s. In most movies, when a scene ends and a character has to travel home, there's simply an edit from one location to the other.
Yeah.
But in this film, we see Sir Thomas More, for example, at the Hampton Court having a meeting.
Yeah.
And once that meeting is done, he has to walk outside. We see him walk outside. He has to call over a boatman.
He's basically hailing a taxi in the 1500s.
Absolutely. The boatman comes over to the dock. He gets in the dock. We see all of this.
There's
unfold.
a practicality to
There's
it
a
that is
practicality
really
to it.
surprising here. You're right.
He gets into the boat. They have a small conversation. They have to travel by water through the night for Sir Thomas More to get all the way home. Something that would have taken several hours, and the film does a great job of giving you that sense of time. There are a lot of sequences in the film that are like that that I find really captivating. It perhaps loses some of that in the final act when it becomes a courtroom drama, but generally the film is immersive in a different way than most movies. It is in the fine detail. It is in the day-to-day life and how every character has a role to play, a very specific role to play, and they go about doing their business and living their lives within those confines. And man, I found that engrossing here, that the film would pause and take time to show us those things. And that's what differentiates this from the stage play version of it. It takes advantage of the medium of cinema in a really, really great way that, again, I think is detail oriented in a different way than a lot of period films like this. While still giving us those great aesthetics. The production design, the costuming,
it's a great
all of it is
movie.
still really great. But from a direction perspective, from a storytelling perspective, it wants to supplant you in what this time period was really like at a fundamental level.
Yeah.
And man, I was not expecting that, and I thought
I
it was
like
great.
I like the way you verbalize that because I think that's ultimately why the film felt like such a transitional film. Like I said in my opening thoughts, how
Yeah,
it feels like it has this it feels like it has a place in the way historical epics were constructed even just a few years before it, but it does kind of have the grittiness and the griminess of what we'd expect from the new Hollywood that was about to surface. And I
yeah,
think it is the focus on the practical. This doesn't take place in modern times like movies like let's say Easy Rider or Midnight Cowboy, which we'll talk about towards the end of this series.
yeah,
But the filmmaking here from Fred Zinnemann does kind of carry similar tactics. There's the emphasis on that practicality, but also the smallness of things. And the fact that this film just feels like such a bridge between two different sensibilities makes it such an interesting relic in the context of this Best Picture series. Like I
yeah,
could really feel the wheels start to turn and the influences start to change with regard to how films were made at this time. And this movie is kind of a nice bridge between the two. And I like that it focuses on the mundanity.
yeah,
That's another reason why it kind of reminded me of Conclave in a way, because that's a movie that does kind of have a grandness to it as sort of a facade, but it does kind of have it's really just people talking in rooms, and that's essentially what this is. For most of it, it is people talking in various
yeah,
rooms. It does, but it
yeah.
doesn't feel obviously it does feel like it came from a stage play. This is also adapted from the same screenwriter of the stage play.
Sure. Yeah,
Robert Bolt, I believe his name is. He's also writing the adaptation here, so the language still feels like it came from a stage play like setting. But the movie doesn't move like it feels like a stage play. It doesn't carry the
yeah,
same stagey qualities that we tend to criticize these adaptations for. Like it actually
yeah,
feels like it's well interpreted for the film medium, and I think
yeah,
that's great on Fred Zinnemann as a
yeah.
filmmaker for sure.
Absolutely. And that's where the writing and the directing here are wonderful complements to each other,
I agree.
because it is adapted from a stage play. So there are going to be a lot of moments here where characters find themselves in these conversations. And those conversations are enlightening for sure.
Yeah.
However, what I love about the direction of the film is that, again, it immerses us into that day to day, which
Mhm.
then gives us context as to why these characters, in particular, Sir Thomas More, why he reacts the way that he does. And I
Mhm.
love that mundanity. I love that we're watching a man walk down the stairs, get into a boat, and then
I-
float his way
And I
over
yeah,
hours just to deliver a
and
letter, like
and
that kind of stuff.
I love when King Henry shows up at Sir Thomas More's home. It's not just this extravagant arrival like it would normally be. No, he's
Yeah,
got to walk through mud
yeah, exactly. Which he
and dirty
laughs at, and
himself up in
yeah,
order to get to this house. And that's something
yeah.
we've never seen before in a movie like this.
Exactly, exactly. A lot of movies would just show us the elegance of the
Hmm.
king and him walking onto the property and everyone bowing down. And of course
Yeah.
there is a level of that here, but
Hmm.
I do love that it takes that extra step of showing us that at a certain point, as a human being, he has to get off that boat.
Yeah.
And it's not always clean. It's not always elegant. Like
Right.
he jumps
Right.
into the mud and jokes about it and makes everyone there have a laugh. Like
Yeah.
I love that it's willing to give us those kinds of details, because it gives these characters extra nuances in their personalities.
Hmm.
And it
Hmm.
makes the dynamic between Sir Thomas More and King Henry, it gives their conversations more complexity because the personalities really pop off the screen, which I really like. And of course, that's in Schofield's performance. It's in Robert Shaw's performance as
Robert
well.
Shaw's hilarious in this movie.
He's very funny. He's very
Yeah.
charming, but he also comes off aggressive at times. So you can see why people would be
He's
intimidated by him and
yeah.
charmed by him
But
simultaneously.
he's also kind of a whiny brat when
He
he
is.
doesn't get his
Yeah.
way. Yeah.
And that's ultimately the drama of this film. He is
Yeah.
a whiny brat. He wants to get
Mhm.
this divorce. He wants to get this marriage annulled so that way he can marry someone else. But there's all of these politics in his way. There are these religious customs in his way that he has to work around, and he's not getting his way.
Mhm.
He is acting as a child here.
Yeah.
And Robert Shaw taps into that in an incredible way. It's
Even
very, very good.
Orson Welles kind of does too for the two scenes that he has. He kind of has a he's not I wouldn't say whiny in a very verbose way like Robert Shaw is, but there is definitely a scheminess to him and a sleaziness to him that he brings to the Chancellor for a brief moment.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
but yeah, very effective.
yeah, I mean, and that's the great thing about a lot of these supporting characters and why they ultimately juxtapose Sir Thomas More, because there is a lot of corruption happening here. People are doing whatever it takes to maintain their jobs, to keep the king happy, so that way they can live their lives or keep climbing the ranks, whatever their motives are.
hmm
And Sir Thomas More, even as this prominent lawyer and significant figure within the royal ranking, he's maintaining his convictions. And again, I think that's why the grounded pragmatism is important here, because it immerses us even further into why he thinks the way he does. Even at times, if he comes off harsh, like when he's talking to I'm trying to think of the character's name, the character that is pursuing his daughter.
Oh,
And
Roper, I
Roper,
believe.
yes.
Yeah, who he's
And
very much heavily against at one point because he doesn't abide to his own religious beliefs.
yeah, they
Yeah.
conflict in terms of their religious beliefs. He is a Lutheran. Roper is a Lutheran.
Yeah.
Sir Thomas More is, of course, a Catholic. So they butt heads in that regard. And he talks very directly about how he's going to say no to the marriage.
Yeah.
And again, like the performance and the way the film immerses us in the day to day, the way he reacts to the servants in his house, the way he reacts to other high ranking officers and officials, like there is a consistency to Sir Thomas More. And you do come to understand that while at times he is direct, he is a man of God who believes a certain like he has a strong conviction, and he's going to stick to that conviction no matter what. Even when the king himself arrives on his own front lawn,
Yeah.
he says no to the king's face.
Yeah.
And there's something about that level of conviction. And ultimately, and I guess this is a spoiler, but it's also a true story. You can
It's
go
history.
read it up on
It's history.
Wikipedia. It's
Yeah.
history. Those choices ultimately get him beheaded in the end. And that beheading comes at the behest of that corruption. Everything he did was within reason and within the law. He never stepped outside of the law, but because the king was whining, needed to have his way, others then followed suit, and they did everything necessary to make sure that the king got his way. And that included, very much included, stepping outside of the law.
Yeah.
And there's something about that at a very fundamental thematic level that is, holy good Lord, applicable to 2025.
Well,
Holy
absolutely.
crap. It is
Whether you look
so-
at it absolutely is. Whether you look at it through the lens of religion specifically, or even outside of that, there is a lot of there are a lot of parallels you can make between just government and religion and how it operates.
Well,
I mean, if any- yeah,
it's a lot of both, right? I mean,
It is.
because even in the United States, religion runs so much of the politics today.
there is a
so
through line.
much
You're
of the
absolutely right.
politics
And this
today.
is, in many ways, using history as a way of predating what was about to come, because essentially what Thomas More is fighting against is that religious hypocrisy and those who follow the rules of religion, but not necessarily its teachings. And I think that's what's fascinating about the movie, is that it's so hard for movies with these types of subject matters to be able to cater to two different audiences simultaneously without feeling like it's antagonizing a certain political or even religious belief. But this is a film that I think actually has a way of pleasing both Christians and anti-Christians simultaneously, by not being too specific on things, but really just still finding a way to support the church, but not its contradictions and the way it's manipulated and the way it's weaponized.
That's a great point. Yeah, I mean, because his Catholicism is what gives him grace and ultimately what saves him in the end, spiritually speaking, right? Like when he goes to be beheaded at the end of the film, there is a peace there. And he is very much come to terms that his death is coming at the hands of his own faith. And he knows that and has absolutely zero issues with that whatsoever, which is what's fascinating. So you're right. There is kind of, it is not anti-religion in that way. It's just commenting on the hypocrisy angle of it.
Yeah.
And ultimately, that is a lot of the politics that we see today. And look, we live in 2025, so we're talking about how this is applicable to now. But ultimately, as long as religion has a stronghold on Capitol Hill, and for all accounts, I don't know if that will ever dissipate, certainly not in our lifetimes. But that is to say, that's why this film is so timeless, because it wouldn't have just been 2025. Throughout the 1980s, when religion took a stronghold on American politics in a huge, huge way that was destructive, people of the 1980s would have revisited this film and they would have felt the same way. In the
There is
2000s,
a timeliness to it. Yeah.
same thing in the 2000s. If you revisited this film in 2003, I'm sure you would have felt a same level of conviction, and certainly in 2025, where things are now, you do feel it. So because this film is so intricately connected to religion and politics, and that's how the world is run.
Yeah.
That,
it's the way, yeah.
So sticking to that consciousness, that integrity, and whether that is driven, whether those morals are driven by religion or not, that idea of doing what's right no matter the personal consequence and standing up to power and corruption and compromise, that will always be a major talking point. And I love how the film handles that here. It sounds a lot more schmaltzy when you say it out loud the way that I am.
It's actually not.
But
This
I think
is a
in the film it's
movie.
not that at all. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, there's some great writing here too, courtesy of Robert Bolton. A lot of this writing probably also stems from the stage play itself, but the way that this governmental / religious overseeing body essentially creates these loopholes to chastise Thomas More, there is a timeliness to that. It's the fact that his silence then gets twisted as a form of denial. So that's how they're able to. That's how they're able to judge him so harshly. This specific act, this specific oath that he refuses to acknowledge, basically claims that the king's marriage to Catherine and how she was his brother's widow, that's how they deem it as quote unquote unlawful. So now he's able to remarry to Anne Boleyn. And it's really just because they wanted him to have the ability to father a son. That's the only reason why they twisted these words. And that's a corrupt version of a loophole. That's basically what they do here. And some of the writing here, in order to emphasize that, I think is quite powerful. Probably my favorite line in the movie. And I think this is sort of the go-to line from the movie for many people is Thomas More's analogy of the earth being flat versus round. Saying something like, if the earth is flat, will the king's command say it's round? Or if the earth is round, will the king's command flatten it? It's essentially the ethos of this whole movie, but I think that's pretty good writing.
Oh my gosh, that's fantastic. I love that moment as well. And again, he says that without stating any sort of opinion. I'm not saying the earth is round or flat. I'm just saying that if this is how it's claimed to be, the king's court is going to do the complete
They'll make it so.
In order to get around whatever loophole they need. And if that's not the story of humanity, I don't know what is.
Absolutely.
That is ultimately how power and corruption works. And I think that is what's so fascinating, to your point about his silence, is that it is completely loaded. And this is what I love often about subtlety, even though Schofield's performance isn't wholly subtle, but when it is, I do think it is quite powerful, because the silence of him here, particularly in the back half of the movie, it is not a sign of guilt. It is not a sign of weakness, but rather one of wisdom and lawfulness. His silence is, of course, his version of resistance, but he's doing it in a way to protect himself, because he was able to do it while being within the confines of the law.
Yeah.
And he is someone that is very conscious of words, and how words are articulated is
Yeah.
very important. Like there's that whole moment when he's, again, going back to the level of detail in the film, there comes that
Hmm.
moment later on when he has to go down to the dock and he calls over the boatmen and they refuse him
Yeah.
because of the politics and the heat coming down on him. So he
Yeah.
has to walk home, and the film shows us that he is walking home, and it's cold at night and it's windy, and eventually he gets there, and his daughter informs him that there's this new oath. There's a new oath of supremacy.
Hmm.
And if you don't take the oath, that is then labeled as treason.
Yeah.
But he's like, what is the wording? I
Yeah.
need to know the wording, because the
Yeah.
way it's worded is going to be very important in terms of how I approach this.
It's how contracts get you these days too. It's
Exactly. So like, I love how his worldview is through his faith, but the way he physically acts in the world is very strategic, and it comes through his
Mhm.
education and his occupation of being a lawyer. Like I just, how
He's
all of that
yeah.
fuses in the Schofield's performance and the writing of the
He's
character is
he's very
breathtaking.
he's very clever. He's one step ahead of
Yeah.
everything that's happening, and that's why he gets condemned for it. I love the scene
Yeah.
that he has with Thomas Howard, the Duke of Norfolk specifically, and how they basically have to fake an argument and ending their friendship just for his own safety.
Yeah, that was really good.
A little more obvious, but like that's a great example of how cryptic and intelligent that Thomas More is. And I do love Paul Scofield's performance here.
He's really
Apparently he wasn't even in attendance at the ceremony because he
Yeah, I
didn't
did
think he
see
was
that.
going to
Yeah.
win. He thought Richard Burton was going to win for Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, but no, Scofield ended up winning the award anyway.
Could you imagine if that happened today? Like everyone just goes to the Oscars today.
I know,
unless
everyone
you
goes.
have racist tweets on Twitter, and then people are like, "Well, maybe don't come." And even in that case,
You still go
everyone
anyway.
was still there. But yeah, I can't fathom that today. Like that just wasn't the Oscars history for a long time. Like everyone
Mhm.
goes now, but could you imagine if I don't know, whoever, I'm trying to think of someone nominated for Best Actor, like just didn't show up because
What if
Adrian Brody's gonna win. Like
what if Cillian Murphy didn't show up?
Killing
Because
he
everyone
knew he
thought
was
Paul
going to
everyone
win.
thought Paul Giamatti was going to win or something like that.
Well, it would be kind of the opposite. I feel like
Yeah.
it felt like Killian was on his way to win, but like
Yeah,
if
so then
Paul
in that
Giamatti
case, Paul
decided
Giamatti
to go
doesn't
to
show up. Yeah.
yeah, he just went to In-N-Out Burger because he's like, I'm not gonna
I'm
win.
good,
Who
I'm
cares?
good.
Screw it. Like that's wild. If that
Yeah.
so funny.
Yeah.
But
This
yeah,
movie
he's really
won-
great here though.
This movie won 6 Oscars: Best Picture, Best Actor, Director, and of course, cinematography, costume design, and writing for Robert Bolt.
Makes
Was
sense.
also nominated for Best Supporting Actor. Robert Shaw, I think that's a very fair nomination as well. Wendy Hiller was nominated for Best Supporting Actress, which I was a little bit surprised by. She has one great moment towards the end, her final scene with Thomas
Yeah,
More. I
very
think that's
good.
what gave her the
Very
nomination,
good.
but I feel like consistently Susanna York actually has more of a powerful female presence in the movie as Thomas More's daughter.
Yeah,
Interestingly,
I agree.
this is her second film in the 60s that won Best Picture because she was also in Tom Jones a few years ago. But yeah, I thought Wendy's nomination here, and she was also the one that accepted Schofield's award on his behalf because he wasn't there. I could see why she got nominated because of that one great final moment, but I thought Susanna's work consistently was also very powerful, if not more powerful.
Yeah, Susanna York is also really, really good here as well. Sometimes it just takes a scene to
Mhm.
get nominated, and ultimately that is Robert Shaw is not in this film all that much.
No, but he does something in that one scene, and maybe it's also because of how the narrative incorporates that performance into the actual story that ends up happening. You feel his powerful presence at every turn. It's almost kind of like the Mahershala Ali thing with Moonlight. Even when he's not in the movie, you could feel his overarching presence, like this ghost lingering throughout the movie. And in the case of this movie with King Henry, it's not necessarily a ghost lingering throughout the movie, but it's this powerful, overlooking presence that's there as a threat that's always looking out at you.
Yeah.
Like you feel that.
Oh,
You
it's a
absolutely
great.
feel that.
I totally agree. Like what he does in his one moment is extremely powerful.
Hmm.
So I don't disagree. But that is to say, sometimes that's all it takes is one
Yeah.
moment, and you're
Hmm.
in, and it's really great. And I don't know the year on the whole all that much to know if it was deserving or not. But as far as this film is concerned, that performance and that sequence is crucial,
Yeah.
absolutely vital, and one of the best scenes of the film for sure. It's
Yeah.
also interesting too, total coincidence. But last week I also watched The Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3 for the first time,
Oh,
and
nice.
Robert Shaw
Nice.
is also in that film. You want to talk about two completely different performances? Like those two have nothing in common. I was like,
What an
man, live
actor.
in 1 week, I get to see the rage of Robert Shaw. Of course, we all know the
What
rage of Robert Shaw, but
we all
it
do.
was just
Yeah.
funny how that worked out.
And given how much you and I are big fans of From Russia with Love, we both think that's the best Sean Connery Bond film. He is great in that movie. Kind of
Yeah.
introduced as just the henchman, but then makes it known that he is perhaps one of the best adversaries for James Bond, at least
Yeah.
of that early era. Really versatile actor, one that we certainly lost too soon because I think he only passed
Mm.
away at the age of 51, 1 year after Jaws came out.
Yeah,
So
crazy.
yeah, we definitely lost
And
him too
obviously
soon.
he's great in Jaws, and that's probably where most people most know him from. But
Yeah.
and yeah, he's great in Jaws, but everything pre-leading that, yeah, I mean, he's fantastic. And From Russia with Love, I completely forgot he was in that. But yeah, you make there's a lot of great points there. Yeah,
Hmm.
great actor. Love Robert Shaw, and he's really really good. And
Yeah.
in this film, in his
Yeah.
one little moment,
John
as is
Hurt.
Orson Welles.
Yeah.
Orson Welles. I know
Orson
we
Welles.
talked about him briefly earlier, but I love Orson Welles. He's one of my goats. Absolutely love
Oh yeah,
Orson Welles.
he
And,
makes an impact here for sure.
oh my gosh, big time! Yeah,
Yeah.
he's fan freaking tastic in this film.
So does John Hurt. We mentioned him earlier that this
John
is his
Hurt,
first
yeah.
major film. He really does stick out. And I was actually watching a portion of this movie with my wife, and I said, "Hey babe, do you know who that is?" And she's like, "No, but he looks familiar." And then I mentioned Mr. Ollivander from Harry Potter. And she goes, "Oh!" So she's a big Harry Potter fan. So that was her connection to John Hurt.
Nice. Yeah,
Um,
that's same thing with Brandy.
yeah,
Anytime I bring up an actor, she just goes, "What else is he in?" And then I
yeah,
have to like list off, and she has to try to find whatever her connection is.
yeah. Yeah, it's
Yeah, that's
amazing.
usually how it
But
goes.
he's really good here too. How about a brief glimpse of Vanessa Redgrave as Anne Boleyn?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I was like, "Oh my gosh, that's Vanessa Redgrave." It's to the point now that we have to call it a cameo, even
I
though
know.
it wasn't really much of a cameo at that time. And apparently, she said because of her limited role, she didn't even want to get paid for this movie, just given how limited that it
You know
was.
what? I did read that actually. Now that you say that, yeah,
Okay.
I did see that trivia on there. Yeah,
Yeah. Well, I
I'm
guess I think a lot of the people who are acting in this movie took some massive pay cuts just to make sure it stayed within its budget.
yeah,
A lot of people seem to be really passionate about this story at the time.
yeah. This was the brutalist of its day.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, everyone took a pay cut. It was made
Hmm.
for $2 million, which I don't know what that translates to. Maybe it is Brady Corbet's 10 million. I don't know. Wouldn't that be funny?
I'm kind
But
of
yeah,
curious about this. I'm
everyone-
gonna pull up an inflation calculator right now.
Wouldn't that be funny?
All right, CPI inflation calculator. Let's see. Okay, this was
2 million.
okay, 1966. I'm gonna do that, and then okay,
Yeah.
so 2 million. That equates to about 20 million nowadays.
Okay. 20 million by today's standards. So a
Yeah.
little bit more than the brutalist, but still made everyone kind of took their cut.
Yeah.
To make this movie and
Yeah.
and for it to pay off the way that it did.
But it just goes to show the level of conviction and passion that not just the filmmakers and the studios have for this movie, but even the actors. They wanted to make sure that it got made in the way that it was. And I guess, I don't recall when Robert Bolt's play first premiered. Maybe it was very famous and top of mind at the time, and they wanted to make sure it was as faithful and connected to that play as possible. Maybe that had something to do with it as well. But to see everyone rally behind making this movie the way that it was is just kind of a neat thing to see.
Yeah, no, I mean, taking stage to screen adaptations was the 1960s version of animation live action remakes.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
happened a lot, right?
yeah.
So,
It
and
did.
obviously, a few of them we've talked about in the series that won Best Picture. So it was clearly a popular thing to do.
Yeah,
And A Man for All Seasons, I think, is one of those great ones. I think this is
yeah.
maybe an underrated Best Picture winner. I
I
don't
like it
think
quite a
that
bit.
it I don't think it's going to end up in a top 10 or 15 for me as far as best picture winners of all time. But if we're
No, it's
just talking about underrated best pictures, a film that people don't really talk about all that much, then
mhm,
yeah, it is going to be up there on that list
yeah,
because it isn't talked about all that much, but it is a film that is timeless for all the reasons we mentioned. I love the filmmaking here. I love the grounded day to day inclusions and how immersive that is. And I think this is a really good movie. Really good
yeah.
movie.
So of the movies nominated this year for Best Picture, the only one that I'd seen before is Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. And
Yep.
I will say, I do think I like that movie more than this one, but I think this movie is a better Best Picture winner, just given the context of it, if that makes any sense.
Sure.
I think it's a more
Yeah.
fascinating one. Like I said, not my favorite of the movies that won Best Picture in the 1960s. I would certainly take this over My Fair Lady and even Tom Jones, but we're also
Yeah.
dealing with some all-timers with movies like
Big
Lawrence of
time.
Arabia and The Sound of
Yeah.
Music. Anything that has to compete with those movies is going to come up short. So the fact that we're dealing with a movie like this, that's essentially like a 4 out of 5 on Letterbox for me, that's pretty darn good. It's pretty
Yeah.
darn
I
good.
mean, when it's all said and done, this might rank like sixth or seventh on the list for
Mhm.
this decade. And that's not a slight against this film at all.
This is a good
I think
decade.
it's
The
really
Academy got it mostly right for most of these.
Yeah, look, I am perfectly happy with this from year to year, and we talk about this all the time. It is very rare that my personal favorite film of the year wins Best Picture. It happened
Yeah.
with Oppenheimer, and I don't even know. I guess you can include Parasite, although
Mhm.
Parasite was like two, I think, for me,
It was top
for that
5, so
year.
still pretty close.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
still pretty close, but it's very rare that there's a crossover in that regard.
Sure.
If I was around in 1966, would this have been my favorite film of the year? Probably not, but it's a winner that you're still very happy with. And that's
Mhm.
ultimately how, at least that's how I anyway, manage the Oscars every single year. It's not a
Sure.
matter of whether I would have picked it to win Best Picture. Most of the time, I would not have picked that film to win Best Picture.
Yeah.
I would not have picked Anora personally to win Best Picture. Am I happy and thrilled for Sean Baker? Absolutely.
Mhm.
So it's a very similar thing. I loved Anora. I thought it was great. I've been a Sean Baker fan for a long time, and to
Sure.
see him get his win and get his notoriety, I am all for it. I liked it a lot, and I would
Yeah.
feel the same way about 1966. Yeah, really good movie. I can
Mhm.
live with that,
Yeah.
especially when the Academy can get it very, very, very wrong. Some of the time. So
Well, yeah, I'm curious to see if they get any of these other ones wrong. I've seen Midnight Cowboy before from 1969. I haven't seen Oliver from 1968.
hmm,
I I In the Heat of the Night, which will be the next film in this series, that may be one that I think I've seen, but I don't recall.
yeah,
I have to give it a rewatch, kind of like with My Fair Lady. I
yeah,
thought I'd seen that before, and then when I started rewatching it, I was like, none of this seems familiar to me. Maybe
yeah.
this is a first time watch.
And
So
look,
yeah, we'll see.
in the Heat of the Night could also be another great example because with 1967, I can tell you right off the bat, it's at best three on the list. At best, it's three on the
Yeah,
list. There
yeah.
are two films, just of the five nominated, let alone any other film that came out in 1967.
Mhm.
In the Heat of the Night would not have won Best Picture for me. Is it one of those films that, despite it winning and it wouldn't have been the film that I voted for, is it something that I can still be happy with? We'll talk about that next week, and that very well could be the case.
Yeah.
Um, you know, and I think that is the disappointment of something like My Fair Lady, for example, because
Yeah.
obviously we were always going to champion Mary Poppins and Doctor Strangelove over that film.
Mhm.
The disappointment with My Fair Lady is that it doesn't even come close to those two. Like not even on the same stratosphere, not on the same planet or galaxy. And that can happen. And that's where the disparity gets to be a little frustrating.
Sure.
You know, when it's something like, A Man for All Seasons and Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. Yeah, I agree with you. I probably would prefer Virginia Woolf over this film, but most of the time, my favorite film doesn't win. But this is one I can be happy with.
I'm just
really
happy
like
that
The
the
Man
film
for All
that did,
Seasons.
yeah, just happy that the film that did win is still not just a good one, but a relevant one.
Yeah, and one that still holds up very well.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
Good movie.
There are films that have won Best Picture that might be good, but do they hold up over time? Which can be two different things.
Yeah, a lot of times they're just reflections of that particular time,
Yes,
aka
exactly.
Crash.
Exactly. Gone with the Wind is
Very
another
much,
one.
very much.
So,
Yeah.
All right. Anyway, with all of that said, if you agree or disagree with anything we had to say here, you can leave a comment below if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, hit us up on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky. You can always email us in sessionfilm@gmail.com.